I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. This week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition is about how to make the most of a plant-forward diet or a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet. There's a lot of reasons that we may choose any of these lifestyles and any of these nutrition patterns to incorporate them into our lifestyles. But for almost all of us, at least one of those reasons is going to be health and our overall wellness. But simply because we're choosing plant-based foods or a vegetarian diet or even a vegan diet doesn't necessarily mean that they're nutritious for us. And I think back to, I was vegetarian for about 15 years, from when I was 15 till when I was just shy of my 30th birthday. And back then, I think even more than now, the emphasis was more about what you're not eating. I'm vegetarian. I don't eat meat. It's a meat-free diet. So it wasn't about what are all the good things that I'm adding in. It was more about what are we not having. So I really love using the phrase plant-based versus even vegetarian or that we're just cutting out meat, because we really do want to look at, if we are making these choices, vegetarian, vegan, semi plant-based, it may not be fully plant-based or plant-forward diet. It's about what are we adding in. And I think a perfect example of that is, I remember, I've never been a big fast food person just my whole life. It wasn't how I grew up. It wasn't really, if my dad and I did fast food, it was more of like a treat, back then it was like a big treat to be able to do fast food. But I remember I was probably in my early 20s and we were on our way somewhere. It was Brad and I, he was my boyfriend then, not my husband. And we were stopping somewhere. We were on the way and we went through a Burger King and he was getting, I don't know, Whopper or whatever. And I was really hungry and I knew I needed to eat something before we got where we were going. So I ordered, and we're in the drive-thru, and I ordered a cheeseburger, no meat. And you can imagine how that went down, in 1999. And they're like, you want a what? And this is, through the drive-thru window. And Brad's looking at me like I'm getting the stink eye from him. He's like, you're really going to make me order a cheeseburger, no meat? This makes no sense. And to the person taking our order, it made absolutely no sense at all. They were so confused. They were repeating it back. They couldn't even do it through, they were like, just pull up to the window. Let's talk about it. But that was a perfect example. A Burger King cheeseburger, no meat. There's very little that any of us would agree is nutritious about that. Maybe whatever semblance of real cheese is in that cheese, but otherwise there's nothing good about that. But that was my choice for what was going to be a vegetarian diet, because the emphasis again was more on what I'm not eating. I'm cutting out meat. So it actually, I mentioned I was a vegetarian for about 15 years. And I think this is something that's, I guess, important to know. Once you kind of decide that you want to do something like that, thinking about your why and why is it so important to you to do this. And so for me, it was from particularly the animal perspective. I didn't want to, it was about, I don't want to consume an animal, and I don't want to consume an animal that, fish, I would have some. I felt like that was a little bit, less of an animal that would know me or respond to me, but I didn't, for the most part, I was like, I don't want to eat an animal. And that was my reason for choosing a vegetarian diet. But I realized over the years, as I got, into my late 20s, as I became a registered dietitian, as I started working with clients and really guiding them through making choices that truly nourished their body, I realized that my reasons for following a vegetarian diet, I didn't feel so strongly about those things. Yes, I still love animals. I still care about that, but I didn't feel nearly so strongly that this was something that I had to continue to do. But at that point, it had been 13, 14 years. And part of us, it becomes your identity. Everyone just kind of knows that you're doing this. They would know that, oh, that's Emily. Yes, she's vegan. And it becomes almost like part of your identity, almost really kind of part of a label that someone would have. Not necessarily we think of labels in a bad way, But you're categorized as that. You're categorized as vegan, or you're categorized as whatever it is. So when you change that, it feels weird. It feels uncomfortable to you. It's surprising to everyone else around you. You almost feel like you're. So I guess what I would encourage you to do is, if you're doing something like this, whether it's vegetarian diet, whatever it is in your lifestyle that you are doing that you felt really strongly about, you made this change in your diet or in your lifestyle in general, what's the reason you're still continuing to do it? Are you continuing to do it because that's kind of what everybody expects you to do and that's what you've always done, and so you keep doing that? Or are you doing this because you're still truly passionate? Again, it could be about anything in your life, really. So I kind of was thinking that for years, and I'm digressing here, y'all. We've got a lot of do's and don'ts of the plant forward diet, but I like to share this part too. I thought about it for maybe a year, 2 years. It was kind of just in the back of my mind, like, I don't really have that same drive to continue what is, it is a restrictive diet to some degree. You're eliminating entire categories of foods and options. And it actually, the night that I changed, we were out to dinner. It was probably 12 of us, and we had been to a work event for Brad, and we were with a group of, it was just our really close friends. I've known them for years at this point. We're at a restaurant downtown in the French Quarter. It was called Maximo's, and they have like great steaks, great lamb. They have it's just this great kind of just a wonderful restaurant. And so I had whatever I had actually gotten a fish dish or scallops there. And, I mentioned that I would sometimes do fish, largely vegetarian, but if I was in a position like that, I would do fish, and kind of that pescatarian approach. So I had scallops, and then everyone's raving about, oh my gosh, this is the best lamb I've had. This is the best whatever filet. And there's a girl next to me who I didn't know that well. She was like a cousin of one of the others. And I said, do you mind if I have a bite of your steak? And she had no idea that I was vegetarian. So I just turned to her, quietly asked it. I take a bite of her filet. It was like needle off the record. Everyone at the table is like, what just happened? And Brad's looking at me. He's like, who are you? Like, you just ate this? Because that was, again, so much of that part of that identity. And I was like, that is the best thing ever. We swapped plates. She had scallops for her dinner. I had the rest of her filet. And then other people were like, try this, try this. And that was, of course, like a really delicious way to make that change. But what seemed like a very sudden change on the outside to Brad and our friends had actually kind of been marinating for a year, 2 years in my head. And I just was like, I'm just not feeling that same drive. So I'd encourage you, again, whatever it is, make sure that the reason you're choosing a certain element of your lifestyle is because you are truly driven and passionate about that. So when we're looking at something like a plant-based diet, plant forward, vegetarian, vegan, I do think it's really important to keep our focus more on what is this adding into my diet? How is this benefiting my whole body wellness? What are the things that I'm choosing to have? Looking at it more that way. What are we adding in versus what am I cutting out? And I think it keeps us more in that positive mindset. It has us less about, oh, I can't have that. I don't eat meat. I don't have these things. Trying to make the shift that it's less about what you're not doing, more about what you are doing. And of course, back then in the 90s, the vegetarian definitely was about, what am I cutting out? I'm not eating meat. And it definitely did not always translate to nutritious. There were so many things back then. Low fat, of course, was key. If it was low fat, we thought it was better for us. If it was low fat and vegetarian, then wow, that's fantastic. But a lot of those options were just, quite frankly, they were terrible. Bowls of plain white pasta with just red sauce, because we don't have the meat sauce, and whole wheat pasta and all the other legume-based pastas. That wasn't really a thing so much. So we would have pasta with red sauce, or low fat, but high sugar bran muffins, or my gosh, snack wells. Well, a lot of these things, yeah, they fit into a vegetarian diet. It means that we're not eating meat, but what kind of nourishment are we getting in? So really thinking about that. And these days now, I really like that the phrase plant-based is used so interchangeably with vegetarian and sometimes even with vegan. There's a lot of vegan brands. These food products will choose to use the phrase plant-based on the label and in their marketing campaigns, using the phrase plant-based instead of vegan. And I've talked with some of these companies and their thought process on it. And The idea is that and restaurants will do this too, but the idea is to appeal to a wider audience. If they say vegan, the concern is that someone who's a big meat eater is going to say, well, that's not for me, that's for vegans. Whereas if it does say plant-based or plant-forward or something like that, it's less about saying this is for vegans. And yeah, if you're a meat eater, but this looks good to you, then great, you're getting more plants into your diet. So I definitely like that plant-based, plant-forward. It's much more about what we're adding in these days versus what we're cutting out. Still, though, it is really easy for us to fall prey to the marketing, to the messaging that so many of these products that are labeled as plant-based, that these products are inherently better for us. So here's a step-by-step guide to ensure that you're truly getting these plant-based foods that are actually nourishing your body from the inside out. Before we dive in, though, I want to take a minute to talk about our sponsor for this week's podcast episode, Sweaty Betty. So y'all know that my job, separate from this podcast, is managing our Ochsner Eat Fit nonprofit restaurant initiative and our nutrition department at Ochsner Fitness Center. So this means that we're really fortunate in that our work attire often means athletic wear. So I'm so excited. I just received my first pair of Sweaty Betty power leggings this week, and I love, love, love them. No other athletic brand can compete with the Sweaty Betty Power Leggings squat-tested compression fabric, and they have these fantastically placed seams that physically shape and lift our core and our glutes. They are quick drying with a perfectly placed little side pocket, and you can take their quiz at sweatybetty.com to find your perfect style and choose from a huge selection of strategically cut patterns. I'm loving Sweaty Betty's, and you will love them too. They are buttery soft with super cute patterns. I went with a dark camo for my first pair. So now through November 1st, only through November 1st, you can get 20% off of your entire purchase when you visit sweatybetty.com/fueled. This is the best offer Sweaty Betty has anywhere, because no matter how hard we're training, Sweaty Betty makes it effortless to look and feel amazing before, during, and after your workout. So get 20% off your entire purchase at sweatybetty.com/fueled. So here is a step-by-step guide to ensure that you're really, truly getting plant-based foods that are genuinely nourishing your body from the inside out. So number one, first and foremost, scan the label for the not so great stuff. So think artificial sweeteners, artificial food dyes, added sugar, preservatives. Some of the most, I think, like infamous examples of, yeah, they're vegan, but they're nothing nutritious, include stuff like Swedish fish, Oreos. These are, yeah, they're technically vegan, but no one is going to say that these are nourishing to our bodies. I would also say most varieties that I see in stores, most varieties of vegan cookies, also things like flavored plant-based yogurts. So the soy milk yogurt, the almond milk yogurt, the coconut milk yogurt, there are unsweetened varieties that are decent, but almost all of them are really high sugar flavored plant-based yogurts, and a lot of veggie chips. And so this is just to name a few. We're going to kind of break these down. But first and foremost, scan the label for the not so great stuff. So first, we want to make sure it doesn't have things in it that we don't want. Number two is, does it contain actual plants? And products like Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger, they contain plant-based protein isolates, protein concentrates, and some potato starch. So they are technically vegan, but they really don't add any veggies into our diet. And some of those things that we talked about just a second ago, the cookies or chips and stuff like that, many of these have really no true vegetables at all. So number one, make sure it doesn't have stuff in it that we don't want. Number two, does it contain actual plants? And if so, which plants? Are they filled with corn, potatoes, rice? Or do they add in things like leafy greens, the deep reds, purples, oranges, and yellow vegetables? So for example, those veggie chips that are made with mostly corn flour, potato starch, rice flour, the vast majority of veggie chips in the grocery store that are kind of just on your regular chip aisle, almost all of those are some blend of primarily corn, potatoes, rice. Yeah, they might be using a little beet powder for color, spinach powder for color, but that's it. They're really just corn chips, potato chips, or essentially rice chips that are marketed as veggie chips. So yeah, they may be technically they're adding plants, but they're not really plants that we're struggling to get more of in our diet. Same with those veggie burgers that we talked about too, that are mostly they're protein isolates and concentrates. They're a great way to get protein into our diet. But there's also veggie burgers that are filled with things like black beans, spinach, kale. There's veggie chips that are made with real whole vegetables dehydrated to be crispy and crunchy versus those starchy chips. So, does it contain actual plants? And if so, don't go by what's on the front of the package. Turn it over, look at the ingredient list, which plants are in here, and where do they fall on the list of ingredients. If they're down at the very bottom, especially if they're under that like contains 2% or less, it's really insignificant. We want it to be in the first 1, 2, or 3 ingredients. I would even say in the first 1 or 2 ingredients to make sure you're truly getting these veggies. And then number 3, if you see that, okay, well, these really aren't that great, upgrade your plants when needed. So things like pasta. Is pasta, white pasta, or even whole wheat pasta vegetarian or vegan? Yes. Most of them they're all vegetarian. Some would even be vegan. But let's upgrade it. Let's switch to something like Banza pasta. We did a full podcast with actually the folks from Banza, the R&D team. Banza is the chickpea pasta. So it's giving us a lot more protein, a lot more fiber. It's basically like eating chickpeas in the form of pasta. So upgrading our plants to, it's a vegetarian white pasta, but let's upgrade it to that chickpea pasta or Banza pasta or spiralized vegetables. Easy way that we can add in carrots or butternut squash or beets or sweet potatoes, zucchini, getting all that color in instead of traditional pasta. Then there's also things like pastas made out of black beans or lentils or edamame. These are all ways that we're adding real vegetables. Those are the primary ingredients in these pastas. All these that we just said, carrots, beets, zucchini, black beans, lentils, edamame, chickpea. This is what those pastas are. And so it's basically a way that we're getting those veggies in our diet in the form of pasta. Rice, of course, white rice. Yeah. Is it plants? Yes, but it's really not giving us any significant nutrients that we can't get other places. So making the switch to cauliflower rice. Instead of the chips that we talked about, go to real vegetables. You can make your own kale chips. You can buy chips, but real whole veggie chips, or just do real veggies. Slice thinly, use those for dipping, grill them, keep those around for snacking. But when we're looking at your veggie chips, are you actually really even getting veggies? And then fries. I love doing things like turnip or eggplant fries instead of French fried white potatoes. You can just do a quick Google search and there's a ton of recipes how to do these. And eggplant fries, you can use a little bit of almond flour to batter them and do basically oven baked eggplant fries or turnip fries. And juices. If you're doing a lot of juices, looking at the ingredients and see, they may be green or they may look like they're veggie juices, but how much of it is vegetable versus how much of it is fruit juice. So I get fresh pressed juice. We get it weekly from the Green Fork here in New Orleans, and it's a blend of beets, greens, turmeric, ginger, all types of things. Or there's also options in grocery stores or your own local juice bar. And look and see what are the different ones. Is there a discount maybe at the juice bar for buying in bulk? Could you do 7 at a time, put 3 in your fridge, 4 in your freezer, kind of rotate them through? But there's different ways that if you are a juice person, how much of it is fruits versus how much of it is vegetables. So number 1, scan the label, make sure it doesn't have that not so great stuff in it. Number 2, does it contain actual plants? And if so, which plants? And then number 3, upgrade those plants when you need. So other things to kind of think about when you're looking at, okay, I want to include more plants, a more plant forward, plant heavy diet. A lot of things like pasta sauce, red sauce, soups, curries, salad dressings. A lot of these are naturally vegetarian. Some are vegan, but it's also really easy to incorporate extra vegetables into a lot of these. You can either use them, add vegetables to your soups or your curries or your pasta sauce. You can also puree vegetables. You can puree mushrooms and use that to thicken soups. You can puree carrots and tomatoes and use that in your pasta sauce. But you can really make the vegetables part of that sauce and they become more bulk in that sauce. They thicken it, they're adding more nutrients, and you're just consuming it as part of the sauce. Or you can put more vegetables in those sauces and have that just like you would instead of meat. Or doing plant-based or plant-forward doesn't mean you're not eating meat necessarily. You may still have your shrimp or your chicken or something in there, your lean beef, but you're also adding in a ton of vegetables with these things. So always, also with those things that we talked about, if you're buying them, the pasta sauces, the salad dressings, just always do a scan of the labels, like we were saying earlier, make sure there's not anything wacky in there that you don't want, but also compare the sodium, compare the added sugar, because there's a huge variation there. Also say our Eat Fit smartphone app, and our Eat Fit app, it's free for download. We have a bunch of restaurants on it that are throughout Louisiana that'll tell you where your Eat Fit partners are. But we also have brand specific shopping guides on that. And those are a really great resource because we have, which pasta sauce is the best? Which salad dressings are the best? So I would encourage you to go to the Eat Fit smartphone app, download it, and you'll see there's several different types of shopping guides there that are very brand specific for you. You'll see it in your app store. It'll just say Eat Fit, and it's it's just an orange logo. If you see the one that says Eat Fit NOLA, that was actually our old one, and that's still fine. The city is using the Fit NOLA, Eat Fit NOLA one, but what we're keeping updated that has everything I'm talking about is on the one that simply says Eat Fit. Also, just some other things that we have, I think a lot of us have normally in our diets, nut butters. Essentially, these are all plant-based, and we don't think about peanut butter or almond butter, but those are easy. Yes, they're still plants. Same thing here. Look for products with little or no added sugar. I think I've talked about bitchin' sauce before. I've definitely talked about it on our WGNO TV segment. I love this. If you haven't seen or tried bitchin' sauce, look for it in stores. It is one of my personal favorite dips. I love the way it tastes, period. I love it. It's creamy. It's full of flavor. They have a chipotle variety that I love. It also happens to be vegan and raw. So it's made with ingredients like almonds, nutritional yeast, Bragg's liquid aminos, really good, clean ingredients. You would have no idea that it's vegan if someone didn't tell you, but it's super rich and creamy. So that's been one of my favorites. And that's, I think, a great one that it's like, I'm eating it because I really love it. Oh, and by the way, it happens to be vegan and raw. And a reminder, as we're talking about kind of different types of foods as you're thinking through your day, for the most part, sweets like cookies, cupcakes, donuts, these are largely still just cookies, cupcakes, donuts. Some of them are lower sugar, but naturally sweetened, but most of them are going to be marketed as if they're healthier for us. Oh, they're vegetarian cookies, they're vegan cupcakes. But what's really in them? How much sugar is in them? What flours are in them? Is it still a lot of tapioca starch, a lot of kind of white processed flours? They may be gluten-free, but how nourishing are they? There's a few brands that I really love. So Unrefined Bakery is, they're the bakery that actually produces our Eat Fit King Cake. But Unrefined Bakery, and I'll include the link to this on our podcast episode notes, they have a huge variety of gluten-free, low sugar options that you can order from them. And they use all natural plant-based sweeteners. There's another company called NaturBaker, and both of these are available online. I'll link to both of them, but they have like really solid ingredients. They're both essentially small businesses, but easy for us, they're both women-owned businesses, small businesses. I love them personally, but also really love their product. They're easy to order online. So I'll include the link to them. And then also, if you haven't tried them, if you're looking for the sweets and you're looking for things that are like vegetarian or vegan, the Swerve Bake Mixes make it really easy. They have cakes, cookies, brownies, pancakes, and those are available in most grocery stores. If you don't see it in your grocery store, they're also available online. And we can't forget protein, of course. But before we get into protein, I want to talk just a quick bit about our sponsor for this week's podcast episode, Nutrafol. Nutrafol is a supplement designed to support the growth of thicker, fuller, healthier hair from the inside out. You've heard me say it before. I am a huge rules follower, very consistent when it comes to skincare, hair care, and I follow the specific recommendations, what my dermatologist tells me to do. And what I love about this is not only does she recommend Nutrafol to her patients, she uses it herself. It is a physician formulated nutritional supplement that is made with really potent botanicals. And so essentially what this means is that there's a lot we can do, like backing off of our styling tools, heat, chemicals, things that we're doing to damage our hair. We can dial these back, and adding in Nutrafol helps to support that healthier hair from within. So it's truly possible to grow thicker, stronger hair and also support our show at the same time by going to Nutrafol.com using promo code FUEL to get 20% off. This is their best offer anywhere, plus free shipping on every order. That's 20% off at Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED. Their best offer anywhere, 20% off Nutrafol.com. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED for hair as strong as you are. So when we are talking about prioritizing protein, when we're looking at a plant-based or especially maybe more of a vegetarian or vegan diet, protein can be lacking if we're not careful. It's not hard to get enough protein in. It's actually really, really easy to get enough protein into a vegan diet or any other type of plant-based or vegetarian diet, but it's definitely something we need to be mindful of. We need to keep an eye out for. Fat usually isn't an issue, but protein can be. One thing I want to note though is there's kind of, I guess, like the whole grain fallacy, or especially the quinoa protein fallacy. So if someone is opting for, again, this plant-based, vegan, vegetarian diet, quinoa kind of pops to mind for a lot of people first. And, we often hear about it as a super grain. It's, talked about for being high protein, high fiber, high iron. And when we compare something like quinoa to white rice, yes, it's higher in protein, fiber, and iron. So for about 1 cup, it gives us 8 grams of protein, 5 grams of fiber. It's also giving us about 220 calories and nearly 40 grams of carbs per cup, which is about the same amount of carbs that we get in white pasta. A cup of beans, in comparison, say just black beans, has the same calories, but double the protein of quinoa and 3 times the fiber of quinoa. So twice as much protein, 3 times as much fiber, also about 30% more iron. So yeah, quinoa is better than white rice, but it's really not the protein-filled option. It's got, essentially, we would say 5 times more carbs than protein. And so when we're looking at, okay, where are we going to get our protein or our fiber, our iron, there's a lot of other foods. For example, like a cup of cooked spinach has more than twice as much iron as quinoa for just a fraction of the calories. So something like plain Greek yogurt, which would fit into a vegetarian diet, gives us about 23 grams of protein per 6-8 ounces. So, and that's only about 140 calories. So a lot better ratio of protein to calories than that quinoa. So is quinoa bad? No, but think about quinoa as being more of a carb, and I would say not even a hugely fiber-rich carb, but a decent fiber-containing carb. For 40 grams of carbs, 5 grams of fiber, that's fine. But as we mentioned, that same amount of black beans, 15 grams of fiber. So think about quinoa as your carb source, an okay source of carbs, not crazy high in fiber. And it's got a dose of protein, but really not significant. So if you're not concerned about carbs or calories, quinoa is fine. I mean, it's good. It's just like eating, a notch better, I'd say, than eating brown rice. But if you're using quinoa as a protein substitute on your plate, in place of your lean meat or poultry or seafood, just be aware that it is that calorie-dense protein alternatives, and that there's a lot of other non-meat options out there that have more protein, more fiber, more iron, for a lot fewer carbs and calories. So this is one where we could do an entire podcast on those types of non-meat proteins. But, just kind of start scanning your shelves. And we'll talk about kind of like steps in just a second. But if you're looking and you're saying, gosh, I'm really struggling to get enough protein in. First of all, if you're switching to a vegetarian or vegan diet, or even really trying to include more of a plant-based focus, do a food log for just a couple of days or so on something like a MyFitnessPal. Log your intake and see. We also have our Fit Lab app, FITT Lab app through Ashra Fitness Center. These allow you to just easily track your food intake, and then it can let you see, this is how much protein I'm having, or this is how many of the, different vitamins, minerals, fiber. If you see that you're coming up short and you are looking for something to kind of give you that boost, that's where I would say supplements. And again, we always look at supplements as supplements in addition to an overall healthy diet. They're not the core, but they would be addition to things like the protein powders and shakes. We can find plant-based versions of these. There's also a ton of different meat alternatives. Look for these like in your freezer section, especially. And these, compare the protein on them, because again, those burgers, all those things, they vary from 4 grams of protein to 20 something grams of protein. I also don't want to not mention nutritional yeast. If you are looking at including, going for more of that vegan diet, nutritional yeast is this little yellow flake or powder. It has like a nutty, cheesy flavor, but it is packed with vitamin B12. 2 tablespoons have over 100% of the daily value. And you can use this sort of like you would Parmesan cheese. You can sprinkle it over things like vegetables, add it to dips, dressings, sauces. You could even sprinkle it over a salad. Use it just like you would almost Parmesan cheese. So when we're looking at, putting all this together, making sure we don't have the stuff we don't want in the label, scanning that label for the not so great stuff. Does it contain plants? If so, which plants? Upgrade these plants if needed. And then also making sure that we're not letting that protein slip. So how do we get started with this plant forward or plant-based diet? Common sense tells us, but I don't think that we often do this. I think this is, for some of us, it's not our first step. Start in the produce section. We want more plants. We got to start where the plants are. We don't want to go to the freezer section for the processed things. We want to start with like real whole plants. So go to the produce section, look for color. If everything that's in your cart is green and green leafies, that's great. But we want to round it out. Those colors represent all the different nutrients in there. So what's in your cart that's also going to be orange, reds, purples, yellows, in addition to all those greens. So making sure that we're truly getting vegetables as part of our plant-based diet. And then I love the bulk bins. Nuts I didn't mention, but nuts can be a great source, especially of these essential fats. They can be a good source of fiber. And legumes. So white beans, lentils, black beans, beans of any type are going to be a great addition. They're great fiber, great protein, like we mentioned. So starting with that produce section, go into those, either the bulk bins, or you can still just buy them prepackaged in bulk, dried. And then plant-based fats, nut butters, avocado, olive oil. If you're a big baker and you've been using butter, try using coconut oil in place of butter. And keeping all these things that we've said so far, these are all real, whole, unprocessed foods. So trying to make the core of your plant-based diet as unprocessed as possible. So using that as your core, and then, let me round it out. I do want to get a little more protein. I'm going to try one of the Beyond Burger. I'm going to try one of the veggie burgers or some of the meat replacers, or there's a plant-based protein powder that I'm going to stir into, my smoothie. Again, but as you're doing this, really think about your why. Why are you choosing to add these foods? Why are you making these choices? What do these foods that you're reaching for, what do they offer into your diet? And as you're making these changes, make sure that you keep that why first and foremost. Like, why are you going more plant-based or vegetarian or vegan? What's the reason behind it? And let that drive what these food choices are. And again, remembering that it's more about what we're adding in to our diets. How are we using this opportunity to add more nourishment into our lifestyles versus what are we cutting out? So thinking a lot about why we're adding these foods, what benefits they offer. For example, I love this idea. So of course there are vegan ice creams. There's sorbets, or there's vegan ice creams. And that might be what you choose to have as a treat at night if you're doing a plant-based diet. My friend Sophia was just telling me this week, actually, she's been making kind of like a sorbet bowl for herself and her family at night. And this is kind of their ice cream replacer. But I love this because it's exactly what we're talking about. It's truly adding more plants, more nutrients, versus just having something that's vegan or vegetarian. So she takes a bunch of different frozen fruits and purees them. And she'll use some regular fruits like berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, typically frozen. But then she'll also combine those with some that we don't usually find in the produce section. So acai, goji berries, dragon fruit. She just takes whatever kind of good frozen fruits that she finds, blends them. Sometimes she'll add a little bit of avocado. She'll often add like a vegan protein powder even to that. She'll blend that and make a puree, and kind of that's the base of her bowl. That's almost like this sorbet texture. And then she'll top it with things like chia seeds, flax seeds, cacao nibs, unsweetened coconut flakes, a little scoop of a dollop of almond butter. Her kids are super active, super athletic. She and her husband also are. So she's looking for something that is nourishing. It's adding a lot in, but it's also giving them that treat. So instead of a bowl of just vegan ice cream, she finds this way to kind of find this indulgence that is also still really nourishing and just packs in so many nutrients. So I would leave you with that okay, that's, I think, a fantastic example. I'm craving something like ice cream or sorbet, but how can I make it even more nourishing? And you can that's something that you can make your own twist on. You can make it as dense as you want, or, with all those extra add-ins and toppings, you can make it as light as you want. I have a client who did a similar thing with just frozen blueberries. He did frozen blueberries, a little almond milk, pureed it, just to kind of make it to a sorbet. And he loved that as his nighttime treat. So you can make it simple, you can make it dense, but the bottom line, always, if you're looking at this, plant-based, plant-forward, vegetarian, vegan, scan the label. Keep the stuff out of there that we don't want. The artificial sweeteners, food dyes, added sugars, preservatives. Just because it's vegan doesn't mean we can let this slip into our diet. Does it contain plants? Which plants, if so, and upgrade them if you need. Always remember, especially if you're doing more vegetarian or vegan, make sure to keep that protein a priority. And then finally, remember your why we're adding these into our diet, what benefit they're offering, and why we're choosing to live this lifestyle. So let me know what you think. And as you incorporate some of these strategies into your own life, I would love to hear about it. As always, I'll include the links that I mentioned in the show notes of this episode. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.